Welcome to the Let's Drink Bourbon podcast. I'm Tim. That's Wes. Our special guest today is, of course, Bill Samuels. You guys probably already know who this guy is. And like for me, I love your juice. I drink your stuff all the time. Maker's 46 cask strength. I have a case of it at my house. It's hard to find where I am.
Right.
So I've stocked up on it like a champion. Maybe like an ambassador. We'll learn about that in a bit. But I'm just a fan. You guys are closer to family. I want to turn it over to Wes. He's the guy who's got lots of things to talk about. And I'm very intrigued. I'm being in this room for this conversation is kind of an honor for me to be able to hang out with you guys and let you guys talk. And, you know, it's one thing to watch at home, but like, this is like being a part of history for me. So I'm going to sit back as a fan and occasionally chime in and say dumb stuff. But other than that, I'm going to let you guys talk.
Okay.
You got it, Wes.
Well, thanks, Tim. I appreciate it. So I have to say the smart stuff now. So,
yeah, you do.
Okay, great. Bill, thank you so much.
Well, it's a pleasure
for being here. And you know, when I first thought about this idea of doing a podcast, I had a list in my mind of who I wanted to talk with, and you know, not just to stroke your ego, but you were at the top of my list as someone, not just as a family friend, but someone I look at as an icon and a trailblazer in the industry. And I wouldn't have had the opportunities to do what I do if it weren't for what you've done at Makers. And you know, so thank you very much for that.
Well, you're kind, but I've been a huge fan of what you pulled off too.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. We've been
and have been a very active cheerleader.
You have been and that's been very important to me. You know, and I've talked with a lot of folks, you know, about mentors and people in my life that have been very influential to me. And your encouragement has always been very important to me, and that was validation for, you know, my gosh, if Bill thinks that what we're doing is the right thing and the cool thing, then we're doing something right. So thank you.
You had a wonderful idea and you pulled it off, and it's been great for the industry too.
Yeah.
Remember, we all had to change bourbon's image before we could go fight for pie.
You're right.
And that's where so many of the Kentucky distillers changed gears all for the better back in the 90s. Y'all came in with that twist for Angel's Envy and lit the screen up.
Well, we all have, and it's a wonderful time to be in the business, a wonderful time for the Commonwealth of Kentucky, as you know, we've managed to create jobs and create opportunities and have fun. And if you can't have fun in the bourbon business, you can't have fun doing anything. And
well, it's even more fun since we're all friends and have been for 200 years or so.
A lot of people don't understand that, or not necessarily maybe don't understand it. They're like, I've never seen an industry where the competitors, you know, or people in the same business are as collegial as we are. And
they've never seen an industry that's had as many enemies over the years, where we had to circle the wagons. And I'm talking about Prohibition 1, the 14 years, and then Prohibition 2 during the Second World War. And then, of course, the Anti-Saloon League and the Carry Nation, and you just go on and on and on. And while we were circling the wagons many, many years ago, we all became great friends. And I think where it's manifested itself is with the Bourbon Trail. Everybody's amazed how linear that is and how it works. And it works because we all communicate with each other and enjoy the communications, and the customer gets all the benefit. It's really been a great experience to watch the Bourbon Trail come to life and watch the communities in Kentucky receive the benefits of those extra overnight guests and extra restaurant guests, and it's taken them a while to get used to all the Mercedes-Benz and BMWs running around the courthaus. But once they did, they said, "Oh, there's opportunity in there somewhere.
There's some gold in them Dar Hills somewhere."
Yeah.
And we saw that, and this podcast, as you learn and over time, and Tim knows me, and of course, Bill, you know me well. It's like, you know, I'm all over the place anyway. It's called ADD. There's meds for it, and they don't work.
Yeah.
So we're probably going to be all over the place. But since we're talking about you know, the collegial atmosphere in the industry during COVID and the communication, we really saw that during COVID. I think as the distilleries were, we started to shut down. our visitor centers because of COVID, to protect our team members and to protect the public. All that was done in a real coordinated fashion. We switched over and did hand sanitizer and donated that to first responders. The agency I work for was a beneficiary of a lot of that. So, and to this day, you know, the brand homes talk a lot, don't they? You know, about
they really do.
Right.
But the other thing that went on, especially in Kentucky, was the Lee Initiative, where a number of the distilleries got together behind Chef Lee, who is an internationally recognized chef. It happens to have his best restaurant here in Louisville, and it was to raise money for these restaurant staffers that had been put out of work so abruptly by our government, and and that initiative raised $8 or $9 million. It was, I mean, it was just amazing.
Everybody lined up. And then I'll stop patting our industry on the back here in just a minute. And I wanted, as we get into Bill's story, but one last thing, and I really saw that type of spirit after the tornadoes in Maysville. You know, millions of dollars. Mayfield. I always get Mayfield, and I was in Mayfield after the tornado, so I should remember that. But within days, millions of dollars were collected by the industry, and no questions asked. You know, Eric Gregory, the president of the Kentucky Distillers Association, got on the phone and said, "Can you donate a barrel?" We said yes. He talked to you guys. You guys did whatever you can do. So, but really, in a nutshell, I don't necessarily think this is to pat ourselves on the back, but bourbon is truly an inclusive spirit. And not only are we a fabric of the community, we're a fabric of life and life experiences together. And the ability to sit down and share a bourbon and forget all the crazy shit that's going on in the world these days is a blessing to be able to do for us, isn't it?
Well, it is, and to do with each other and to host so many people at our sites. You know, I'm retired. I've been retired 11 years. I go down to Makers 3 to 4 days a week, and it's a grueling 75-mile drive each way. But it's amazing when you get there, full of happy people sipping cocktails and wandering around the grounds and oohing and ahhing. And every once in a while somebody will recognize me, and that makes it good till the next day.
That was going to be my question for both of you guys, really. There had to be a moment when you realized bourbon was picking up, that you start getting recognized as celebrities, right? I mean, like before you just went to work, and then at some point people start showing up and wanting your autograph on stuff.
Because I'm so old, when I started, if you weren't in Kentucky, you were in a sin business. Okay. So that's how far we had to come. I think it started for us in 1980 when the Wall Street Journal did a front page feature on my father. It's the first time he had ever done a profile on a privately held company in that center column piece on the front page. But we were so little and so puny as marketers, we really weren't able to take much advantage of it. So, I mean, that goes to me, because my job was to find customers for mom and dad, because they had done all the heavy lifting. And it was really about 15 years later, we were getting a grip. We had distilleries or wholesalers out of Kentucky coming to us wanting some makers for their better restaurants and all. And in the mid 90s was when Booker Noe brought forward the small batch collection. Brown Forman did that wonderful rehab of the LeBreau and Graham distillery and created Woodford, and Ancient Age, which is now the Buffalo Trace, brought back what's the
Old Granddad?
No, the from Japan.
Four Roses.
No.
Talking about different. I don't know.
I've lost my mind.
That's okay.
But now we had 4 companies that were all in the same business of really trying to improve bourbon's reputation, which had to come before any of us were going to have any meaningful business in bourbon.
And then things just kind of rolled after that. When you saw Woodford and all these other, you started getting what we call them small batch or however that phenomenon started. It really started about then. And I'm still blown away when I go to the distillery and somebody asks me to sign a bottle for them. And it's
really. See, I was thinking earlier, this is things collecting has gotten to the point too with this stuff that when you talked about all of the hand sanitizer that you guys shut down to make, at some point on the secondary market, people are going to be selling the old hand sanitizer for $200 a bottle.
They are. It's already happening.
It's crazy to me, like how this stuff started. I mean, like, look, I love all your products. Like it is across the board. I'm glad that you guys are all friends. So there's no, arguing back and forth about who's got a better stuff because everybody is so unique and it's such an art to have the different types. But when you look at like the secondary market and how crazy people have gotten with this stuff, does that ever? I'm gonna take over for a second because I want to hear all of your stories. But this one, what's it like when you see bottles of your stuff selling for $500, $1,000? Does that hit you as like, oh my gosh, like maybe I charged too little?
Well, that's never been the market that we targeted. Ours is more for the people that appreciate the whiskey as they consume it. And so we've never thought of it as much of a trading market. I've probably got at home one of the most valuable bourbon bottles in that I've got the first bottle of Maker's Mark and Mom and Dad signed it. And that was back in the 1950s. So
where is that exactly?
No, you know what it is. You've been to bar. But no, ours is for consumption. We've always looked at it strategically and not as a game. But it's good that it does sell, and we've never had an over allocation issue. Every distillery in Kentucky that's ever gone broke has gone broke with their warehouses full of whiskey.
That's a really good point.
And I think we got 85 or 90 operating distilleries in Kentucky. They're all operating at full capacity right now.
The secondary market is, and it's like anything with supply and demand, be it bourbon or whatever the commodity is. I sometimes take issue with it because it prices people out, which I don't like to see. And very much like what Bill mentioned, when I create a special release, for example, that's going to be selling retail, let's say it's selling retail for $300. I'm not thinking ahead of time that, wow, this thing's going to sell for, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 online, which is what we see. And so it is unfortunate, but, people in the industry, there's some people in the industry that squawk about the secondary market, like this is the worst thing that ever happened to the business. And I'm like, guys, you should be thanking the secondary market gods every morning when you wake up because people care that much that they're going to pay, and
it's just validation that Kentucky bourbon is good. It validates everything we've been working on for 70 years.
Well, as a geeky collector of bourbon, I actually have the transition little bottle from your last run and then the new first run, and I have that little setup behind myself in my home studio.
Oh, you do?
So like that is a centerpiece of my home studio. So
well, they better not be any difference in them. See, that's the consistency that we aspire to.
I'll never open them. They're going to sit on that shelf forever, like pristine. It's just such a cool little piece that you guys did for, I think it was Father's Day a couple of years ago, wasn't it? That was a special.
No, we did it when I retired 11 years ago.
Oh, I can't believe, I just found that last year.
Yeah, I love my son has been in for 11. He's done a hell of a lot better job than I did. And if you don't believe me, come down to Loretta and see for yourself.
And I want to talk about Rob too, as we get going here, but let's take the time machine back if we could. And I know I have some of my earliest memories as a child of walking in and smelling fermenting mash when I go to work with my dad on weekends. So take us back to when you were a child and you first realized what dad was working on, what mom was helping. And can you kind of lay out that timeline a little bit? What are some of your earliest memories there?
Well, my earliest memories in a distillery were actually when my father would take me over to the Jim Beam distillery, and Colonel Beam was still living, and he was a jokester, and I was 7 or 8 years old, or maybe even a little bit younger. And he would, I'd ask him questions, just all kinds of questions. I was asking him one about the beer. What are the bubbles and when does it get done? And you do the next step. And he said, son, let me show you. So he went out in the yard. They had a feedlot at the distillery. They fed the cattle. Of course, you got cattle, you got chickens, and he went out and got him a chicken and brought it in and sent it out over the fermenter. And the CO2 gas knocked the chicken out. So the chicken's asleep and swimming, or at least floating around the fermenter. And he had a cane, a walking cane at the time, and he went and fetched it and pulled it and fluffed the chicken up, let him go. And he said, "Son, this one's not ready yet." And that's all he ever said. I've never forgotten that. So that was my first memory at a distillery, was Jim Beams screwing with me as a little kid.
But was he really? I mean, there's some science there.
Well, there is. And technically he's right, because you don't distill the beer until the consumption of all the sugar by the yeast is completed. The alcohol has been created. But that was a funny way to go about.
Oh my God. Can we commission some chickens?
I'd love to do that. Are you kidding me?
That.
We're coming down to Makers with a truck of chickens.
I don't know about that. We've cleaned our act up.
Oh, but it's so much more fun. And no chickens are actually harmed during this, I mean,
if you get them out of there in time, it is.
So every once in a while, I will still do this. I will go to a fermenter and I'll lift the lid, and like an idiot, I will stick my head down there.
Hope you take your glasses off.
It maybe once a year, knowing that it's going to knock me back off my feet, but I still do it as a bunch of other stuff.
But it does such a wonderful job cleaning your sinuses out.
It absolutely does. I don't recommend it, but it's great. So 7 years old or so, you're going with your dad to down to Beam. And when did dad start formulating, that this is what, let's back up. What did your dad do before? And this is where I should have done my research, but I wanted to be real spontaneous. What was your dad doing before he decided he wanted to seriously make whiskey?
Well, he wasn't doing enough, because he was getting in Mom's way. He decided he was going to run our small farm after he got out of the Navy during the war. And she ran the farm during the war and did pretty good. So he was underfoot immediately. And she kept making suggestions that he might want to get a job, and he didn't want a job. So one night at dinner, she announced that she didn't care if he got a job, but he was going to get out of the house from 8 o'clock in the morning till 5. And he set up a little office in town and started thinking about what he'd like to do. Had enough money, he could have gone on through the rest of his life and just being retired, but he was never satisfied with the family whiskey, and it wasn't all that great. And so he said, well, and this was at one of the worst hours for bourbon. Distilleries were closing one every 2 or 3 weeks, and so they were pretty cheap. He said, well, I'll just buy a distillery and it'll be my retirement hobby. And so he looked around. He wanted to get one that he controlled the watershed. That was the big one. And he wanted one without a rail siding, because he didn't want all the racket. And he wanted a cheap one. And he ended up buying Old Happy Hollow, which at that time was owned by Dave Karp, for $35,000. 200 acres and a distillery that he's fixed up, and Mom has helped, and it became the industry's first National Historic Landmark. For $35,000. And then he started tinkering, and he didn't anymore start tinkering, and she started interfering, as she was apt to do. Fortunately, she never worked at the company, but she was involved in all the great decisions of the company. She was a chemist. She helped him decide on red winter wheat instead of rye, because it was a little bit sour. She had great taste, designed the Maker's Mark bottle, came up with the name and the type style, which is now an internationally registered type style. He didn't like the wax, because he couldn't figure out how he was going to get it on and how customers were going to get it off. And she announced that was his problem, and it wasn't going to change. And it just, and then later, when I started in the 1960s, 67, I got out of law school, and I'd committed 1 year. So I'm down there and she comes in Dad's office. I'm trying to learn what my job was. She comes in and says, Bill, we got to have a visitor program. And Dad, being the obedient husband, says, oh, Marge, that's a great idea. And then she left. And then I asked him, why do we need a visitor program? We haven't got any money and we've never had a visitor. He said, I don't know. I'll find out tonight and tell you tomorrow. And he comes back the next day and he said, yeah, I got the answer. It's your sister. She needs a job. She's working for American Airlines as the ground hostess out at Stanford Field. And she got terminated and the only thing she can do is talk. So that would be a perfect job for her. So we started bourbon tourism in 1968 at the distillery. And again, because of the relationships, after we got a few visitors, not all that many, she goes and talks to Booker and talks to Frank Krause at Barton, which is now 1792, and Heaven Hill, which had the tour bus running around Bardstown. And we all got together and figured out a way to see if we couldn't put some butts in beds in Bardstown. So it was a community venture at first. Did a little silly marketing program with restaurant placemats and that's how the Bourbon Trail got started, all because Mom decided Leslie needed a job and she was limited in her capabilities, just yapping.
And your mom, Margie, is mentioned throughout, the history of the brand. And we know there are a lot more women, my family included, that had a lot more to do with this business than what you see publicly facing.
Well, I never thought about it. Fred Minix, as he was researching his book on women, he came and talked to me, and he said, "I keep running into your mom in all of this stuff. Did she or did she not have a major role in the big decisions?" I said, "No, she had the role in all of them, and she wasn't much of a compromiser, and she didn't play well with other people, so she pretty much got her way on everything." And that was really the first time that we had thought about her as part of the legacy.
Right.
And then the next thing, she was nominated to become the first woman in the Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame. And from then on, we have given her proper due.
That's great. Now, the wax, which quick question about the wax. So years ago, so the wax actually became, and you're an attorney by trade, but correct me if I'm wrong here, was never really a trademark. But is this how it ended up happening? Was that it was in commerce for so long that it became a trademark, like a constructive trademark, without it being filed? Because I know there was some litigation there, and obviously makers prevailed, as they should have, because it's an iconic part of the bottle. But how did all that go down?
Well, it started. Shapes were represented as design patents, and they're limited to like 7 years. So we could have got one of those, maybe, I don't know. But I worked in the patent office when I was in law school, and that was when they were discussing moving design shapes to patent protection. And I happened to work on the processing of applications through the patent office. So I got to know a lot of the examiners, got to know the commissioner really well, even Franklin Roosevelt, who was the secretary of Commerce, Franklin Roosevelt Jr. And so several years later, I get a call from one of the guys and said, it's been approved by Congress. Coca-Cola has made the first application for the design trademark, and it's the shape of the old Coca-Cola bottle. And they said, if that gets approved, would you like to be number 2? And I said, yes. So I guess that would be I'm criticized by not making many contributions at Makers, and I didn't make so many, but maybe that was one, just working in the patent office and getting that phone call and says, count us in. And as long as it's not functional, and it's not functional, it had a chance. And then, of course, you got the issues of defending it.
Right. Yeah. Every time somebody comes and does something that looks similar. Did your mom look at, and Tim, I'm gonna be quiet here because I'm sure you're chomping at the bit to ask some
I'm
questions
excited to
too.
ask all sorts of questions here. I'm going crazy.
So did Margie look at the wax as a design element, or was it a functionality issue also with just I mean, sealing the bottle, or both, or how did she view that? Do you know?
Well, back in the old days, we used to have a federal strip stamp over the top. So if there was any functionality, it would be that we didn't have to use glue, because we could put the federal strip stamp over the top of the bottle when the wax was still hot. But the court later decided that wasn't enough functionality to disqualify. The caps are such that they don't need. I mean, the wax does nothing other than provide an appearance. And remember, whiskey bottles are not normally designed by women. And matter of fact, as we researched the thing, we never found another example of a whiskey bottle anywhere in the world where the packaging was designed by a woman. So uh, mom had a little different take on it. She wanted it to look good. And she was the judge. We didn't do any research or anything. She was the end all. She was a chemist, so she knew how to work with the wax to get the dripping she wanted, the color she wanted, the translucency, all the time temperature issues that you had to deal with, cracking, and just a lot of property issues of the wax. And she was a calligrapher. That was another one of her hobbies. So she designed the type style, the Maker's Mark type style, and she had a fetish about bourbon ought to gargle when you pour it out of the bottle. And the only way that happens is if you've got the pinch in the neck. And the glass company wouldn't do it because we didn't order enough bottles to put the pinch in, because they'd have to slow the thing down so far. And her solution to that was not give up, but invite the chairman of Owens, Illinois to Derby and have him stay at the house and then just wear his ass out, which she did.
So you had OI doing, you managed to wear them down to do that
To where they would slow the machines down so that the necks didn't tilt. Because when you put the pinch in, you increase the odds that the neck's not going to stand straight up and down. And that's dangerous, because when you put the spigot in to put the whiskey in the bottle, you hit the side of the top of the bottle, chip the glass in the bottle, it goes. Bad deal.
There are so many things that we could have an entire discussion about design elements and functionality, and how a bottle is held, how it's going to pour on the bar. As you said also, how that cork or how that closure is going to go in, and the neck fill height, consistency there, the cavity of the inside cavity of the bottle, the consistency
of that, sure.
And most of those things aren't even considered by, and I guess you don't need to consider it if you're just a bourbon connoisseur, all those elements that go along with it. But before we move on to I want to bring us back up to the future a little bit. As you took over at Makers, Tim, I know you've got some amazing thoughts. So
well, here's my first amazing thought. I'm dumb because I never noticed the pinch in the bottle at the neck, and I think it's brilliant. I mean,
did you ever? But you've enjoyed the gurgle, haven't you?
I've enjoyed a lot of the gurgle, sir. There's been a lot of this in my. But my real question for you is this: so, your sister needed a job, right? Yeah. You just so happen to be working at the patent office as a lawyer. Your mom was a scientist.
Well, no, that was before.
Well, as a clerk,
I was 64, 65.
So
in the patent office, she started in 68, I guess.
How much of this do you think was fate, or how much of, are you guys like a genius family who just happened to be around and this all came together? Because this is like
the genius part is that mom was so talented, just to be honest with you. And the other part of it that we hadn't talked about is Dad's best friends were all into the people that own distilleries. And so when he started on this venture, he was going somewhere he'd never been. He knew what he wanted. The North Star was clear as a bell to him. And he reached out to Jerry Beam, Jim Beam's son, he reached out to Pappy. Pappy helped him a ton. Ed Shapiro, Max's father, and Hap Motlow, who was Jack Daniels' great nephew and was running the Jack Daniels distillery when I was down Vanderbilt Law School. So he became my mentor. My first mentor was Jim Beam. He was our next door neighbor, and he was my godfather. I spent every afternoon with him when I was in kindergarten, first grade, now, and then I didn't spend a whole lot of time with whiskey people. And then I go to law school and I spent every Friday night having dinner with Hap Motlow, who was Lem Motlow's son, who was Jack Daniels' nephew, and just a wonderful man. And he's the reason I came back. But my commitment was only 1 year. And I did take the bar exam, so I was ready to go off to practice patent law. Had a great job offer because I knew everybody in the patent office. They loved that idea. They said, they never asked me, did I know any patent law? They just said, do you know anybody? I said, I know them all. And so I went back and loved working with my dad. And he, he gave me a lot of room. I had no competencies at all. We hired an advertising agency to teach me my job, essentially. And we still got them. Joe Anderson here in Louisville. I mean, it's been a great run, but the skill set that if you drew a line and said, where was the greatness? It was Mom.
She pulled it all together.
Well, when we needed greatness, she showed up to work and she never showed up otherwise. She was on the golf course.
I love this so much. It's so wild because when you take a look at it, just as somebody from the outside, again, it's tough. Probably, you've lived it, but as somebody from the outside, when I look at this and I see your story, I'm like, you just so happen to have every element of everything that the bourbon industry needed to get to where it is now and to where it is. It was all there when you were younger, and it all came together perfectly. The fact that the patent office called you and said, hey, Coke just got that bottle done. You want yours done, number 2?
Well, we talked about it before. They said they would call me, and they did, and I appreciated it.
It doesn't work like that anymore. It's amazing. It's like, it's perfect. I'm in awe of this. So I'm going to shut up again and let Wes get into the history.
No, this
of things.
is great.
Like as a fan, number one, shame on me for never noticing the bump in the bottle there. I'm busy drinking, it's tough.
It's okay.
But it's so cool to be here. And like I said at the very beginning of this podcast, to be able to sit back and listen to you guys, like I'll geek out over here in the corner and let y'all get back to it. That's
well, let's don't forget what a wonderful idea Wes had and what a terrific job, aided by his father, executed it brilliantly. I mean, as we look around, and the same thing for Brown-Forman with Woodford Reserve. And I sit back now and I say, boy, we got a lot of smart young people in the business, and I wouldn't trade it for anything because we couldn't recruit talent for hell. And now they're just banging at the door.
And that's and thanks again. That's very kind, and I appreciate that. And I look back at, I still do look at, the folks my dad talked about growing up, and knowing as the pioneers in this industry, and we still certainly revere that tradition, and that's something we talk about at Angel's Envy, but we also embrace the progress.
Yeah.
And as long as I've always felt like, as long as we're preserving the history of bourbon, and you saw this, I'm sure you had these internal thoughts and discussions when you decided to reach 46, that as long as we're honoring the history of bourbon, it gives us license to be creative and to do other things. That's my belief. And there is a new generation of distillers. I think of Drew Colesveen is a great example at Willett.
Yep.
I think of I could name a bunch of them as you could as well. And
your son and Rob,
right? Absolutely.
They're there, and they're strong. They're really, and they're committed, and they're winning.
And they listen to us sometimes, Well,
I don't know if I could say that.
But isn't that a great time, though, in the life of your children, to where I've been a couple times where I've sat back with my kids, especially at work. We've had 4 of the 6 there. And I'm like, wait a minute, you guys really finally, you get it. Where you spend so many years as a father guiding their decisions and keeping them from stepping in a hole and doing anything stupid that they can't take back, and try to impart wisdom in whatever way you can. And then you've got them four in a room and you're trying to solve a problem, and you realize, well, hell, maybe dad's solution isn't the best solution at this table. Maybe it's the boys. And I know
Yeah.
you see that with Rob. And now we're
Yeah.
talking about kids. I mean, tell me about how Rob's doing. And I think he's a phenomenal human being, and I think he's doing great work.
The succession planning is critical, and hats off to Brown Foreman and for being nice enough to share their family HR Bible with me.
They shared it? You didn't have to break in the middle of the night?
I didn't have to break in there.
Okay.
I mentioned in a conversation to Mac that, gosh, my son's coming into business. Y'all done such a good job bringing the right family in and having the right conditions before you'd allow them access to the vault.
That's Mac Brown, right? Is that who you're
Yeah.
talking? Okay, got it.
And so he sent me the book, and we followed it to the T, made Rob go get a job out of high school or college. And instead of working 5 years for a competitor, he worked 10 years and did really well. Matter of fact, it cost me a lot more money to bring him back than it would have if I'd have just brought him out of college and did. And the extra education, 2 degrees. I said, I'll give you some time to do this. And I never had to mention another word. He goes off to Harvard Business School. I mean, on his own, wasn't the greatest student at South Carolina, where he got his undergraduate business degree, but he was a superstar at Harvard. So I think, they all grow up, and especially when they find their passion.
Did you ever, in that transition, and you had the book from Brown Foreman, who, by the way, I believe does a great job of bringing family along.
They do the best.
And I'm seeing the new generation of the Brown family members. They had a little void there, I think, where they didn't have as many family members involved at the top. But now you see Campbell Brown kind of coming back in. You see some younger family members, and in a multi-generational business, I think that's a natural progression. But when you come in and I experienced this with my father, is with a father who's kind of bigger than life in the industry.
And he was,
and so are you. So, that creates a challenge for Rob, and it created a challenge for me to kind of find your own way, and you're being very different, I think, also personality wise. How did that work out? And how did Rob find his footing, and how did you navigate that while giving him enough space to grow, but still not giving him too much rope to go out on a limb?
Well, the first part of it, I had the awareness that I needed to retire. And I was 71. And the reason was I was getting older. Our customers were getting younger. And I was having a harder time connecting. And he was right in the sweet spot age-wise. And I'd watched him for 10 years. I never had to give him much direction. He always overachieved the task we did. And so my big concern was, gee, I hate working 50 years and then have some punk come in there and screw it up. Well, it never dawned on me that might happen. I mean, we were way past that. So it was really pretty easy for me to step away and speak when asked after that. It happened, bang, one day.
Was that hard for you to do? I know it has been for me to relinquish, control is probably not a good word for it, but it's your baby, you've nurtured it, to really, but I had to force myself to create some space. And was that a conscious decision on your part, or was it just such a natural evolution that you're just like, well, here we are, let's go?
Well, you got to remember, you created Angel's Envy. My mother and father did all the heavy lifting at our place. They did all the creative work. So my job was really as a trustee. So it would be naturally easier for me to relinquish, especially when there was great competence coming behind me.
Right. Yeah.
And so no, I stepped away, and then Rob's working me to death, because as Makers has gotten more famous and all, he gets pulled. So he sends the substitute teacher in to do a lot of the entertaining. And
Well, people still love to see you. I mean, that
well, the
you're
old people do. I don't know about the young people.
I think the bartenders, those groups. I love working with bartenders and people who, it's a different level of bourbon appreciation, and I've used the word geek a bunch of times, but people who really get into what we do from a scientific basis, from a food standpoint, from a taste profile standpoint, and they're really deep into this stuff. It's just not something you're sitting and having a cocktail with or having a drink of. It's a lifestyle for a lot of people.
Well, last Friday, I got a dose of that, and I don't get that many doses because I'm incognito when I'm running around the distillery. We had 150 bartenders in all at one time.
Was that Camp Run Amok?
Yeah.
Yep.
And Rob went down and did a speech and managed to escape. And he said, "Why don't you go down and just say hi?" Well, hell, I'm down there. I thought it 5 minutes. 3 hours later, I escape. But it was, it's refreshing. It's all of a sudden, instead of feeling 82, I feel like I'm 52.
Well, and those are the bartenders, and certainly the consumers are the ones that pay the bills, but the bartenders are going a long way towards helping those bills get paid by recommending what people drink, and it's a huge part of our business was cultivating the relationships with the bartenders. And Camp Run Amok, Tim, I don't know if you've ever heard of it or not, is a gathering. It's a summer camp for bartenders. And they do it they go to camp, but it's an entire week of everything adult beverage.
I want to do this.
I know. Well,
can we do a Let's Drink Bourbon and I can go as a comp ticket to this event, or we can just go?
There's an application, right? It's an application process.
I know how to drink. I can make a good old fashioned and a good Manhattan. That should be enough to get me in, right?
I think so.
There you go.
Those are the only two that need be.
I thank you. Now I feel very vindicated. This is the clip. You
got to do them well. There's nothing worse than
there's bad
old fashioned or not so good Manhattan. Usually when the vermouth is too strong.
My favorite is a whiskey sour, and
you must make it a unique way.
Yeah, I do. I twist it up a little bit, but to me, in the same way with an old fashioned, in my opinion, they're usually really good or they're really bad.
Yeah,
there's no in between.
Yeah.
So,
have you guys, by the way, while you're both here, have you ever been to a place where you've been recognized, obviously, for who you are, and then they give you a rotten drink?
Oh yeah, all the time.
Yeah.
Do you play it off, or do you go like,
No, or for me, I'm a coward. I let it go.
I appreciate the person making the art, as the bartender, and that's their art, that's their expression. Their expression may not be the same. I may not be as receptive of that expression, but they still took the time to make that for me. And they're thrilled to death that I'm drinking the cocktail that they made for me. And I'm going to try it. I'm going to enjoy it. I may not always finish it, but if I drank everything that people put in front of me at every bar I went to, I'd be consistently in some type of rehabilitation center, because
you'd be me.
We're all the way. We're around it all the time. I want to ask another question, Bill. One of the amazing things about the journey that I've been on in business are the unexpected things that may not have meant anything at the time, but have become important in the brand. So tell me about the SIV.
Well, again, that's the maker's mark. And Mom designed it without doing adequate genealogical research, but she knew the answer, of course, so she didn't ask anybody. The S is Samuels, and the 4 is the 4 generations that my father's family had owned and operated distilleries. Of course, she was wrong, but she didn't know it, and she went to when our business was incorporated. Well, we didn't have an incorporation law in Kentucky until 1840. so that's when she said that was when we started making whiskey. Well, if I didn't learn anything in law school, I learned how to use the library and went back and did the research and found she was incorrect and had the documentation, but I didn't have the courage to present it to her because it was already done. Her idea was, if this actually grew out of a hobby, if I decided to stay longer than a year and had some competency, and we were able to turn bourbon from swill to swell, then maybe it might actually grow into a business. And then we would have the big ceremony when I became president, and we changed the 4 to a 5. And then when Rob came in, it would be a 6. Well, since we didn't have the courage to tell her the 4 was wrong to start with, Rob and I decided to memorialize Mom's one mistake by never changing the 4. So it's the maker's mark. Either she didn't know anything about Roman numerals because she got it backwards, or she certainly didn't know anything about our family genealogy. And so we're leaving it alone. It'll never change. And we're glad that she made one mistake, because she never admitted to making any mistakes.
But that's great. It's become iconic within your brand. And, and then most people, I didn't know the meaning until I started researching a little bit. And I love those unexpected things that come along, and those little ways to honor the family and honor the history that a consumer may not notice or may not realize.
Yeah.
But it's that tradition.
Yeah. We've that was supposed to be the main trademark. And, it was to hook into the name, part of the name, the maker's mark, and there was the mark. Well, it ended up the wax has been the dominant identifier of the brand, which of course is why we protect it so vigorously.
People have tried, but nobody's done it like makers. There's no question about it. Tim, what are you thinking over there?
No, listen, I am just a fan that's sitting back here. Listen, Wes, on the other podcast, people are going to know I will talk a lot more, but when I have 2 basically legends in front of me, hate to build up your ego, Wes. I'm going to let you guys go and then weigh in once in a while, but I just love sitting back and listening to these stories. I mean, you'll see when we talk with like country music guys, I'll ask lots of questions, but with Bill Samuels, you just let Bill Samuels tell the story. I mean, to me, this is all incredibly remarkable, and I'm just glad to be in the room for it. You'll never get that humility out of me on any other interview, though.
I'm going to replay that every time we do this.
You should start with it. Now, let me tell you one we had here with right here with the 46, because when we were able to achieve the organoleptic objective, and what they were, we went at it much like Dad did, is we defined the North Star before we started trying to figure out how to do it. And the 4 criteria were, this was my last project before I retired, and I'm in a room with our master distiller, Kevin Smith. We would meet, have coffee, 3 or 4 times a week. This went on for 6 months. And the whole purpose was not to solve a problem, was to identify the problem. So we identified 4 criteria. And the first one was, anything in order for me to have a product legacy, it had to be yummy. Okay. Not a typical whiskey word, but one that normal people can understand. All the flavors in the front half of the palate. The second one, I wanted to see if we couldn't achieve an intensified flavor, same flavors intensified. So the second criteria we did was makers on steroids. And then third, since makers doesn't have any finish, since all the flavors right up at the tip, I thought, gosh, it would be interesting if we could create a lingering finish, not a long finish, because that drives you to bitter, but something that at least rebounded a bit. And then the fourth one was the authenticity one you were talking about, is we didn't want to do anything that wasn't authentic, that we couldn't call Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. And that was it. And it took 6 months. Well, I think there's like 12 or 13 words. And we go to the cooperage company, and, Brad Boswell, the owner of Independent Stave, and a wonderful guy. And he said, well, I can't help you, but my sister probably can. and she runs the side of their business that provides barrels for the wine industry. And they invented a process of flavor staves that they use in Chardonnays made around the world. She said maybe that could be made applicable to a high proof spirit. We don't know. We've never researched anything like that. Hear the gurgle?
There's that gurgle.
Isn't it wonderful?
That's awesome.
I mean, the fact that mom fought so hard for that, dad was ready to pass on it. He said, I need bottles. We're going broke. She said, no, we're going to get the gurgle. He said,
we gurgle.
Little bit hard-headed.
So by the way, Makers 46, I, as a fan of the industry, went to, they have all these little schools that popped up now, and you can go get your training. Obviously it's nothing like what you guys, it's, you go in, you have fun, you get a little bit of training on bourbon, you get a little coin at the end of the day. I did Moonshine University, and they described Makers 46 as the perfect bourbon. That's literally how they shared it. And I agree. There's so much flavor and every note gets hit all the way through. It's fantastic.
Well, if I can say something about what this guy did, and I sip a lot of stuff. He obviously came from the same direction we did. Flavorful, approachable. And I love 46, but I love what you've done too. I love it. And for the same reasons. It's just well balanced.
There are a lot of similarities, and I hear consumers talk about them also. Approachable is a great word, and approachable. But sometimes in the back of my mind, I think of things if you say approachable, sometimes that can mean that they lack, that they're basic. But they're approachable, but they are complex, and whiskeys that someone new to the category can enjoy because of that approachability, and someone who's an experienced bourbon drinker can enjoy also because you still have those characteristics that make it a great whiskey.
Well, my dad and I were, the one thing we had in common taste wise is that we didn't like the pain. Pain comes from the alcohol. So what's the maximum flavor that you can have at the lowest possible proof? And 46 is our best example of that.
So what was the beginning DNA of 46? And you don't have to go into this if you don't want to. But Makers is known for Makers. You had one SKU. So
it wasn't a marketing thing. It was,
well, that's what I'm wondering. How much of it was that?
Part of it was right here on the side of the Makers bottle. When my father retired, we took his name off the bottle and put mine. And then I was about ready to retire, and I knew Rob was going to take mine off. And since I hadn't created anything, I wasn't going to have a legacy.
Okay.
So Kevin and I decided, he felt sorry for me. He was my sounding. I was whining to him about I was going to retire in about a year and a half. Rob was going to take my name off the bottle, just like I took my father's name off. But the difference was I didn't create anything. So mom and dad had Makers. That was their legacy. The only thing I had was my job description from day one, which said, go find customers. And
you found a lot of customers, Bill,
I mean, but nobody, it doesn't matter. Nobody cares about that.
Oh, it does matter.
And so, Kevin and I were joking around that I ought to do something, even if it's going to be limited. And that's when we sat down and spent that 8 or 9 months just defining what a really good legacy would be. Not so much a gigantic legacy, but from an organoleptic standpoint. From my perspective, we don't do research at our place. What's the perfect bourbon for me? And I just figured we need a little more intensity. We need we need the finish to be a little more complex, and it need to be authentic and yummy.
I think you nailed it.
Yeah. And that was we got in a little bit of a hurry because we invited a packaging firm down. The advertising agency did. We got a lot of good agencies for design in this part of the world because of Procter & Gamble. And they came down and they're sitting there listening to us and they're enjoying the whiskey. And they said, oh, by the way, what's the name? Well, we hadn't thought about that. And they said, well, how in the hell are we going to design a package if you haven't got a name? And so hurriedly, Well, we had Brad Boswell with us, the independent stave owner and the guy that really created the flavor. And Brad, well, it took us 46 tribes, and it was, it was about an 8 or 9 month exercise, 24/7. And that's what we came. We nailed exactly what they were looking for, but it was harder than we thought. And they said, okay, 46 is good. And that's how, and the bottle shape came from, so they go back and they design a bottle shape, fine. And then about 10 years later, Rob and I start having discussions about, wait a minute, Mom was in charge of designing the Maker's Mark bottle. What would she have done 50 years later for her second entree? And that's when we changed the label and brought it back to the same bottle. It was this is really what she would have wanted.
What do you think your mom and dad would think right now if they saw what's happened with Maker's Mark?
Well, Rob told, or my father told me when Rob was about 12 years old, he said, this kid's talented. You wouldn't know it from his grades in school, but this kid's talented. That's the first thing Dad would notice. Oh, well, I see Rob did all this. Well, he did. The second thing, he would be proud as hell of how the industry, because he loved the people in the industry. And that, I mean, that would tickle it. And then he might, on the way out, he would say, gosh, nice job. Now, Mom, she was a gardener. And we got one of the great gardens in the state of Kentucky down there, 40 acres landscaped. It's unreal. She would love that. She would love the fact the Bourbon Trail, which was her vision, is working as well. Everybody's working together. It's a huge success for visitors. And then I think they both would be happy that we hadn't screwed it up, because there's so many opportunities in this business to get greedy.
Right. That's a common thread, don't screw it up.
Yeah.
Because there are ways, and especially now, with how the industry has grown and the opportunities to expand and do things, you can get greedy, and you can rush things to market that don't necessarily need to be in market.
Well, we rushed something to market in 1936. 2-year-old T.W. Samuels was terrible. Everybody did the same thing. They're out of money. They got, Scotch whiskey's coming in, and it was the end of bourbon. I mean, we got hungry. We got greedy 2 years before the bourbon was even near ready.
And that's a common thread, especially now with, some of your newer, and there's a wonderful place at the table for new distilling and new distilleries and new distillers. But you did see, and you still do sometimes see, things come out before they need to come out. And it's purely an economic decision. A lot of times it does take a lot of money to age these products for a long period of time.
It's a very, to me, the greatest thing Dad did was he waited 6.5 years after he bought the place, and 6 years after he started making the bourbon. He never bought any bourbon from anybody. He just said it was a hobby, so he didn't have to be successful. But Mom was concerned he might go broke along the way, because here he was investing what money he had on a hobby where there was no known customers, and up until the last year he didn't have a package or a name until she jumped in and saved him. So it was, I couldn't have done that.
Let me ask, I'm gonna bust in here and ask
Please
you guys,
do.
what is it like? What's the pressure feel like having to carry on a legacy like you both had? I think you both are in very, very unique positions where you have, I mean, these incredible families in bourbon, everything that's happened, and it's up to you to keep it going. What's that feel like?
I'll answer that first, if you don't mind, Bill. I think that initially there's a lot of, at least for me, everybody's journey is different. There was a lot of pressure, coming in for an iconic master distiller like my father, Bourbon Hall of Fame, all these things, and me stepping in was a lot. But I did get to a point, especially after Dad had passed away, And Dad had a wonderful way of being very hands off with me. He was like,
he was the perfect gentleman.
Definitely.
Absolutely. And everybody recognized him for that.
And Dad was a good source of validation for me. He was a cheerleader. He was our biggest cheerleader, and so, but he would let me do what needed to be done. So but I was still in that shadow. But as things went along and I was doing all the blends and I was doing the special releases after Dad had passed, I'm like, well, wow, I've kind of done these things, without my dad. Now, not without his spirit that was with me all the time, and not without the knowledge that he gave me. But then I started thinking, well, hell, I've created some pretty cool stuff too now. So, Dad is still there, always on my shoulder, but I have a less sense that I'm always battling that shadow and trying to prove something, when I think I've accomplished that. Which, Bill, you've done the same thing in building Makers to an international brand.
Well, the finding customers part, yes, but not the creative part.
I wish you'd stop saying that. I really do. I mean, if you look at what has happened with Maker's Mark, but I say I wish you'd stop saying that, but at the end of the day, isn't that what it's all about? We're salespeople.
Yeah.
We are meeting with people to talk with them about bourbon, to share our stories, to share the family history. At the end of the day, we're trying to get people to go to the store and buy our bourbon. So we're storytellers, we're salespeople. So maybe you're not off base at all there.
When I got, well, first off, Dad never put any pressure on me to come into the business because it wasn't a business, and he knew I wasn't going to join a hobby. So it was really the Jack Daniel's people that really put us both on the spot. I only came back for 1 year. And so we had to start on day one. Is he going to really be interested in transitioning his baby into a business? Or do I need to go work as a patent attorney, which would have been all right at the time. I don't think, and I was older. I'd been in the aerospace industry, and working on some pretty big shot projects, Polaris and Gemini.
What? This is like, again, this is, yeah.
And so, like they say in politics, if you've had a bigger job than you walk into, there's no pressure, and there wasn't any. And I know that had something to do with it. But I knew not to screw up what he had created too. But I never saw it as pressure. It was responsibility.
That's a great way to look at it. I felt both of them. There's no doubt about it.
I just love that every 10 minutes or so, Bill says something. I'm like, wait, what you did? Your family did what too? You did what? You were working on the space program too, on top of everything. Holy moly! Like this is such a cool thing that I don't think a lot of people would know, and I'm so glad we're getting to talk about this. So
now we've been going for a while, and I do have to ask you a couple things. Tell me about working with my dad and what your impressions are with Lincoln, and any stories you can think of that are suitable for broadcast that you know of. What are your memories of Dad in the industry and any interactions you all had?
Well, the interactions I had with him were always pleasant. He, of all the people in the industry, the two that were more like my father was Jerry Beam and your dad. And it's temperament, it's intellect, it's just coaching, natural coaches. All three of them were natural coaches. And so whenever I got and I never was a whiskey person. Remember, I got to go keep the smokestack working. That's my job. And so I would get pulled into these situations of having to go to whiskey tastings with competitive distillers who knew what they were talking about. Okay. And I would always navigate where I would go where your dad was because he was a nice guy. He wasn't going to kill me. And then, eventually I learned what I was doing. But for a long time, I was at a huge disadvantage, not being a natural whiskey person. And he was the most gracious human being. I just adored him.
Thank you. Yeah, I
Well, you knew
appreciate
I
that.
did. 'Cause
I did. Yeah, I do. I do. But I wanted for our listeners and people that are watching to, and he always had the same wonderful things to say. Tim, do you have anything? I'm going to ask Bill a couple more questions because
Yeah.
we've been going for a minute here. Anything that you can think of right now that you want to?
Well, I wanted to talk to you about the ambassador program because that's such a crucial part of Maker's Mark, and of course, I want in. That's why I'm asking you. But tell us about that. Like, what was the inspiration behind that? Obviously, you're the sales guy, you're the marketing guy. Like, what got that started?
Well, first off, I'm a little bit in a box because Dad don't like marketers, and he don't like marketers. He figured if you create a good enough mousetrap, you can sit on a rock and the customers will come. Well, this was bourbon. And in those days, people were not looking for a better bourbon, just weren't. And so he had managed, before I got to the company, he had managed to create a nice little market that would, in Kentucky only, that would sustain the hobby. So, I mean, it was enough cash flow to make it work. And then in 1980, and we're going along and we're trying to do better and we're making a little progress, not much. And in 1980, when the Wall Street Journal did that article, all of a sudden we had distributors in other states wanting to represent Maker's Mark. We couldn't get anybody to represent us before because bourbon was out. And they were getting pressure from the better bars and hotels and all. And so that meant to me, before the Wall Street Journal, we knew all our customers personally because I was on a bunch of boards. Dad was on a bunch of boards, and we went to conventions and things, but it was personal. And all of a sudden the Wall Street Journal screwed that up because now we got people that are trying to buy our whiskey outside of Kentucky, and we needed a way to stay in touch. And it was going to be hard to do it. And we didn't know how to do it if we couldn't do it personally, because we didn't have any marketers in the company. It was him and me, and both of us engineers. So the idea was to latch onto somebody that had put one of these frequent flyer programs together for one of the airlines, and then back out the part that was incentive to buy and increase the part that was an incentive to dialogue, because the program specifically was set up not as a program, but as a way to open the door of communications so we could keep in touch with the people that cared around the country. Because it wasn't as easy after the Wall Street Journal, because now we had customers, we had a few everywhere. And so that's what that was about. It never was to sell any whiskey, and still isn't. And they still come to the distillery in droves and love it. And we just do we treat our ambassadors special. And there's not much by way of obligation other than we do want you to show up occasionally and say hi in Loretta.
Probably don't have to twist a lot of arms to get people to show up.
No, well, we did during COVID, but now that that's being lifted, it's making a comeback.
Well, I think that's the genius of a program like that, and it's the gold standard in the industry of a consumer affinity program. And when we talked at Angel's Envy about doing it, we looked at the Maker's Ambassador program because it is the benchmark. I think the Tennessee Squire program that Jack Daniel's has is another one. But our consumers, they want to be part of the conversation. If it's a vehicle where you're trying to sell people things, it's a totally different conversation than you're talking with family members. Your ambassadors are your extended family.
Yeah.
And you managed to do that very well with the ambassador program. So,
and this is what bourbon people do better than any other whiskey people. And that's why I don't think this is a fad. I think maybe not in my lifetime, but in yours, Wes, you're gonna see bourbon be the dominant whiskey of the world.
Well,
go ahead.
No, I agree. Number one, but and I'm sure you do too. But what's really interesting about the ambassador program is it's like, I'm a fan of the Mets. They let me down every year. It doesn't matter. But it's like being a part of the organization. You really feel like you're, like you said, it's like being a part of the family. And that's one of the things that I think bourbon is different from many, many other industries. Again, you're all friends. You're all family. And it's just a very unique situation, and why I've been quiet for most of this podcast. I promise not to do it again. But sitting back,
I kind of like you like that.
This is over. We're gonna cut it. But no, but it really is. There's something to it. Listening to these stories, like it's one of the few times I don't have much to contribute because I'm just sitting back and I'm like, oh my gosh. And then Bill, when you're like, oh, hey, by the way, yeah, I also worked on the space program, and then I went off to, went back to do Maker's Mark. Wild stuff that not many people get to know. And me as a fan of yours and of your product, it's just fun to sit back and listen. And it's one of the few times it's fun to sit. My background's all politics, and I hate listening to politicians talk. I could listen to you guys talk for hours.
Well, let's we'll start to wrap things up here. But you went exactly where I was about to go when you said bourbon is not a fad, and you don't believe it's a fad, and I don't believe it is either. I think we've got a long runway to go. What's the future of bourbon look like to you going forward, other than just to say it's not a fad? But where do you think we're headed, and how? I know you're bullish on it, but be a little more specific about it.
My big concern, because I'm selfish for Kentucky, I would like the monopoly to remain here, even though about 95% of the world's bourbon is now, number of distilleries is outside Kentucky. We've got 90, but there's like 2,300 operating bourbon distilleries now in the United States. And there's another 11 or 1,200 that have their permits. And almost none of them are in Kentucky. We've got a tax problem, and that's the barrel tax, which is a disincentive for people to come into Kentucky and invest money. In order to keep that monopoly, in order to keep Kentucky bourbon as one word, which is the objective. That's the strategic objective of all of us that think and understand the value of having a high margin monopoly on something that's really cool around the world. It spins off other industries. The taxes are incredible. And the jobs, it's the highest paying job we have in Kentucky. And it's the fastest growing category. So everything's going good. The biggest problem we might have is our elected officials, and I don't like to pick on them, but they are focused on the now. And we need to primarily be focused on keeping that monopoly, because that's it. It doesn't make any difference to us as producers or marketers. It means a lot to Kentucky.
Well, that's the other side that I believe people don't understand, is that the economic impact, the tourism impact, and all those things that the bourbon industry does to bring to Kentucky. So we really can't rest on our laurels and just assume that the business is going to keep, just go, accelerate by opening new markets. We have to aggressively, through legislation, through cooperative efforts as distillers, as communities, as residents of Kentucky, to do what we can to preserve.
I see no indication that any member of the industry is resting on their laurels. It's the elected officials I'm concerned about.
Right. Yeah, I see.
Because boy, this is really good. Well, it can be so much better long-term for our grandchildren. It can really provide incredible jobs for the next generation.
Well, it did pay for all of our early wars, so they should be very grateful, the politicians. So
the whiskey.
Oh yeah, the whiskey tax. Actually, whiskey tax paid for about 100 years worth of wars. So
well, there's some truth to that. It was certainly when they couldn't have eliminated whiskey without the income tax.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's all about with the government. It's not necessarily about creative whiskey. It's the one thing that never stops during the government shutdown is the accounts receivable department. As it rightfully should.
The restaurants found that out. So
yeah, and as a business, the first thing I do is shut down the accounts payable department. You always leave the accounts receivable department open. Yeah. So, Tim, do you have anything else that you want to ask our friend here?
I just. I'm going to ask dumb questions to finish this up. Have you ever had a juice that you just think is the worst? Not necessarily from Maker's Mark, but like from like a competitor or something. Like, what's the worst experience you've had?
Well, I can say that in the last 10 years, all of the bad juice I've had has come from somewhere other than Kentucky. And I suspect you've had the same experience. The Kentucky distillers have really done a good job in the last 30 years. There is a lot of garbage out there.
As a Texan, I've never had a good juice from Texas.
Well, I didn't say that. You took the words right out of my mouth. And I love the people that are, it's just, it's too hot out there.
There is a juice that I was given once, and somebody's like, "You got to try this. It's amazing." And of course, I look for like age statements and whatnot.
Yeah.
And on the back of the bottle, it said aged at least 24 hours, and I go, "What is this?" And it was terrible. Of course, it was terrible. I had a distillery there down the street from me, actually, that gave me a really good juice one day, and I go, "This is amazing." They go, "Yeah, it's Heaven Hill. It's been we sourced it." And I go, "Of course, that's great then. I mean, it's a." But no, I'm disappointed in my home state actually with our juice.
Well, they do so many other things well, like tax policy.
Well, you can't be great at everything,
Yes.
so that's fine. Let us have our bourbon, and let us continue to contribute as you guys have. And but Bill, thank you so much for.
Oh, it's always a pleasure, buddy.
For coming today. You know, our family has a tremendous amount of love for you all, and respect, and not just what you've done in the industry, but Bill, you never give yourself enough credit. But outside of the industry, Bill, you know, is serves on boards and it has an amazing impact on a lot of stuff around here. So thank you for that as well. I appreciate it. And hopefully we'll have a chance to sit down, and I want to come to what night is it you guys gather at the bar? It's a Wednesday night.
Wednesday night. You're welcome.
Thank you. I need to make that. So thanks again, Bill.
But you need to bring your boxing gloves now.
Whatever I need to do, I'm in. All right. Well, thanks everyone for watching and for listening.
Yeah. It's the Let's Drink Bourbon podcast. You can follow us at Let's Drink Bourbon on Instagram, at Bourbon on Getter. And of course, just look up Let's Drink Bourbon, letsdrinkbourbon.com. Subscribe, like, tell your friends. There'll be many, many more great discussions like this. Thanks for listening today.
Well, Tim, thank you.
This was awesome.